Hey everybody, Scott here. Just making another video, and it's going to be companion to the short that I made on YouTube, reacting to a Rick Beato video with Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, talking about um, feeling insecure around jazz musicians because Flea has been a rock musician who created something very original with the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and went on to become one of the biggest bands in the world. And but someone like him of his stature, who's very well respected as a bass player and musician and a contributor to the Red Hot Chili Peppers, feels insecure around jazz musicians. And I think that's because, and this relates to, this is basically imposter syndrome, and not feeling like you're good enough, or not feeling like a phony playing with jazz musicians or creating more jazz style music when you spent most of your life playing rock music, and not just straight ahead rock music. The Chili Peppers were a hybrid of a mixture of styles, and they created something original. And as a musician, I've always felt like I wanted to do that. I did go to jazz school. I went through music academia, and I'm very grateful for it, actually, because it really put me on a path to becoming a serious musician. And I've done so many things since then. My first experience going to college when I was in my early 20s made me a better bass player. I focused on playing the bass. That was my major. And then 20 years later, I went back to finish my bachelor's degree, and I focused on composition. And that put me on the path to exploring more of my creative side and my ability as a composer. And that was fantastic. However, in those types of schools, there's always like an elitist element, and it's either with jazz or classical music. And so I understand how people feel like, if you're not a practicing jazz musician, if you don't do that full time, but you're playing with jazz players, say you've hired some jazz players to play on your album, like Flea did with his debut soul album that's coming out soon. Um, how you would feel maybe insecure because these guys are playing very highbrow music. Now, jazz takes um, a lot of technical skill and great ears to be able to execute, and it's considered uh, the highest level form of music, technical form of music that you can play. Classical music is in some ways too, but then again, a lot of classical musicians can't improvise, and they can't play unless they're reading a chart. So the really, really great jazz musicians back in the day didn't even need charts. They just played. So I think one of the flaws of jazz school, music academia, and I'm not saying this is all schools, but a lot of them really don't encourage creativity. And a lot of what I've seen is a lot of students kind of being pressured to play through these jazz tunes, these jazz standards, and in a way that you're expected to kind of sound like the old greats, or play it in an authentic way, which is faithful to the style, rather than be creative. And I've seen a lot of music students struggle with this, and um, I struggle with it, actually. And I didn't have enough playing opportunities within the jazz um, genre to be able to really get behind, really get into that style. Playing traditional jazz, being able to play through standards, being able to solo over all these standards, playing bebop, playing post bop, modal jazz, things like that. So I was learning the theory and practicing some of it in my private lesson, but I wasn't really getting it because I didn't really grow up as a kid listening to jazz. I listened to Stevie Wonder, I listened to Michael Jackson, the Beatles, a lot of the greats. And then when I was in high school, I got into grunge music and the Seattle sound and the SoCal scene and all the 90s music, that early 90s renaissance. So I was really influenced by all of that. And as a musician, um, I always wanted to just be like, I just wanted to play in a band that was like Rush or Primus, something original, but like high standard, playing to a high level, playing at a high level with chops and creativity, but not conforming to jazz. And I feel like there are jazz musicians out there who come out of school and they're criticizing the guys in Rush, they're non-players, and they're, Neil Peart can't swing and all this kind of stuff. And okay, maybe Neil Peart can't swing as much as someone who's just a jazz drummer. But he created his own thing. He composed on the drums, and he was an innovator on his instrument. And he may not be as good as someone like Vinnie Colaiuta, because Vinnie Colaiuta was a studio musician. He's also a really good improviser. But then Vinnie Colaiuta isn't like some of the jazz drummers either. Like he's Vinnie Colaiuta adopted a bunch of different styles um, and became a studio musician. And Neil Peart didn't go either of those routes. He didn't become a jazz musician or a studio musician. So he had a singular vision within Rush. And I think you could say the same about Primus. You could say the same thing about Les Claypool. He's not a studio bass player. He's not a jazz musician, but there's jazz influences in his music. And some of their stuff is very jazzy, actually. And he can improvise, but he's not a traditional jazz musician or a studio player. He developed his own style. But I feel like that's becoming more rare these days, and there's more pressure to just conform and be like on the internet, like influencers. I mean, there are influencers on the internet, like musicians who are getting sponsorship deals and going to NAMM and stuff, and they're just playing covers. They're not doing original compositions. And I definitely struggle with that. I'm like, well, should I just start playing covers, or should I just be myself and have my own style on my instrument and have my own composing style? It's not always going to wow somebody in 30 seconds, It might take a little while to absorb. I've always just followed my musical instincts. I like blending. I've discovered that as a composer, I like blending different styles together. And back to what Flea was talking about, how he felt insecure. He's like, oh, I don't play jazz very well. But he spent decades trying to create something unique with the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And he developed his own unique style on bass guitar. And he became world renowned for it. And I think that's just an incredible accomplishment. But I understand why he feels that way. And it's very natural as a musician to feel that way and to have imposter syndrome in certain situations. And I mean, I even woke up today thinking, wow, no one's really listening to my music. Is my music any good? Where does it fit in? And, um, I think there's just so much pressure these days especially these days, to fit into a scene. But then you can also create something original that doesn't fit into a scene. That's not scene based music. Um, and like the band Krongbin. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but Krongbin, they're a three-piece band from Texas, and they created this really unique sound. And not all of it's unique. Some of it's based on like uh, 60s, 70s surf psychedelia sound that was adopted all over the world. During the Vietnam War, the Vietnamese pop bands back then developed that sound. The Turkish psychedelic pop bands, um, and they kind of have a global sound and a very relaxed vibe to their music that really appeals to a lot of people. But they don't really fit in with any scene. They're just them. Um, and I think if you are concerned about fitting in and you're struggling with imposter syndrome, then maybe you're on a good path. That means you care about what you're doing and that maybe you're creating something innovative. So I think that's all I wanted to say for this video. And I'm going to continue on exploring the subject um, down the line. I'm going to make more videos on this. And I'm on my own musical trajectory. I released an album and I'm trying to figure out who my audience is still, and where it fits in. And it doesn't necessarily, I'm not saying it has to necessarily fit into a scene, but um, I'm continuing to explore my own voice and sound, and um, what comes with that is sometimes questioning yourself and having imposter syndrome. So it's a never ending journey, and I encourage people to follow their own path and create their own sound. Okay, everyone. Until next time. Cheers.